Hello, my friends. It's Monday, January 19th, 2026, and I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, your Red State refugee, and welcome to the Radical Russ Show, your weekday morning wake and bake, coming to you from Rolla J Studios in Southern Oregon.
And it goes down smooth. Hey!
On today's smoke session, let's talk about what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has to teach us today by way of historian Howard Zinn. But before we get to all the serious political stuff, we've got time for 3 quick hits.
That means a lot coming from a guy who painted his head like some sort of sports ball.
Wow, what a great weekend for NFL football. The Bears, you live by the heave, you die by the heave. That's all anyone is talking about in the sports world. The amazing fourth quarter comeback by the Chicago Bears quarterback Caleb Williams, who, as the radio announcer Kevin Harlan put it on the Westwood One coverage, I think it was his color commentator, he ran backwards 15 yards like Fran Tarkenton. I always love a good Fran Tarkenton reference. That's incredible. Anyway, amazing throw from Caleb Williams, who backed up, like you said, like 26 yards or so, and gave this heave to the back corner of the end zone for Cole Kmet, the tight end, to catch the ball for the tying touchdown to take it into overtime. But they, alas, lost the game. Lost the game to the LA Rams. Matthew Stafford, they'll be going on to face the Seattle Seahawks, who absolutely obliterated the San Francisco 49ers, which was tough for the folks in Southern Oregon. A lot of Niners fans around here. On the other side, in the AFC, we had the New England Patriots doing away with the Houston Texans, and in the game I was following, the Denver Broncos and the Buffalo Bills, who are kind of my AFC team, the Buffalo Bills. A lot of the reason for that is my good friend Bacon Dan, who was a big fan of my marijuana podcast. He was from Buffalo and brought his Bills Mafia vibe to my studios, and because Khalil Shakir is a Boise State wide receiver playing for the Bills, and Shakir pulled off an amazing hook and lateral play that got the Bills to go to overtime as well, hearkening back to Boise State in the 2007 Fiesta Bowl. But alas, it also wasn't to be for the Bills, as the Broncos were able to pull it out with a field goal in overtime. So 2 heroic quarterbacks, both losing, even though they had some pretty noteworthy plays. And speaking of the noteworthy plays, what is the down by contact rule? Is this like the National League and the American League in baseball, where one of them has a designated hitter and the other doesn't? Because there was that call with the Bills. Was it the Bills game? I think it was the Bills game, where the receiver goes down catching the ball at the same time as the defensive player has his hands on the ball. His ass hits the ground, and then the defensive player takes the ball away, and they call it an interception. Wasn't this guy down by contact? Well, not in the AFC. No, in the AFC, you get a fight all the way through the continuation of the catch. Whereas in the NFC, we had a play that was just almost the damn same play happen, and the referees called him down by contact. So, I guess it's the different way they play in the conferences. Oh, and by the way, I saw somebody on the Blue Sky feed post that Kevin Harlan, the announcer for Westwood One, made the best radio call for that Chicago Bears touchdown. I completely agree. Being poor like I am, I don't get to subscribe to Peacock and Amazon Prime and everything else you got to subscribe to actually watch football these days. And I live in this mountain hideaway where we don't have over-the-air TV, so I haven't really watched a football game all year. I listen to them on the SiriusXM app. So I've been listening to all these radio calls. I listened to the Packers home radio call. I highly recommend it. In fact, if you've got one of those subscriptions, and some of the TV subscriptions like YouTube TV as well, have the ability to pause the broadcast. If you have the ability to get like SiriusXM and hear the radio broadcasts, pause the live TV broadcast and let the radio broadcast catch up with it, because usually the TV broadcast is ahead of the radio, and sync them up. Watching the game synced up, listening to radio announcers watching the football on TV is the best possible combination. Radio announcers know how to describe what's going on and reset everything because they have to put, theater in the mind. The TV announcers are blabbing about something they see. They're talking about, all sorts of irrelevant stats they don't care about at the moment, something that's a graphic on the screen. Who cares? I can read what's on the screen. I don't need you to read it to me. Anyway, I'm ranting. Well, I got myself another note on my star-spangled Chevy. If you haven't seen it, I have a white Chevy Volt that I have festooned with blue and red stars all over it, and quotes from Republican and Democratic presidents along the sides. It always garners a look, gets lots of photographs, lots of compliments, and now my 5th thank you message. People often see my car in the parking lot and they'll leave a note underneath my windshield. And so this one, the newest one, a little green piece of paper, says, "I love your car and your message. Thank you. You made my day." So I'll post some pictures of the Star-Spangled Chevy. I got to do some touch-ups on it. Going through the car wash, some of the points on the stars are starting to peel, but we'll get that touched up to give you a look at how I am trying to spread the message of liberty and justice for all here in Southern Oregon. I had one of my riders get in the car the other day, and she said, "Oh, when you pulled up, I thought you were some kind of Trumper. But then I saw your Smash Fascism sticker with the Blues Brothers, and I thought you were all right." And I just thought, how sad it is that someone who's like gone full bore patriotic, red, white, and blue, stars and stripes looking car, would automatically be thought to be a right winger or a Trumper. And that's what I'm trying to change. I told her this is kind of my stealth way of getting people to pay attention to stuff, right? Because, from a distance, you see the red, white, and blue and the stars and all these guys in their coal-rolling 4x4 pickup trucks aren't going to think twice about it, right? Maybe they won't, give me the smoke or peel out next to me or flip me off because they see the stars and stripes and say, "Yeah, America, fuck yeah." But if you're in a parking lot and you're walking by it and you're having to take a look at it and read it and see the different quotes I've got on there, and I've got quotes from Republican presidents too, like Ronald Reagan, "I believe in the concept of amnesty for people who have set down roots here, even though they might not have come here legally." Or, the Teddy Roosevelt quote about, we must have respect for the president, or the Eisenhower quote about every bomb, every gun is a theft from the people. I'm paraphrasing him. I have perfectly memorized. So yeah, I've got Republican and Democratic quotes on the car. And I'm just trying to, spread this message and also trying to reclaim patriotism because, I served this country and I believe in its founding ideals, even if its founders didn't live up to them. I believe the story of America is how we have tried to force and forge this nation into what its founders pretended it was at the time. And so I hope that's getting through. I hope it's having an effect on people, and I hope more people are coming over to our side. God, I was watching a show the other day, and one of these shows where they got to steal a car, right? They're getting away from something, and quick, we got to steal a car. And so the guy gets in the car, and he reaches up into the steering column, and he pulls down a couple of wires, and he strips the thing out of the wires, and he zap, and hot wires the car, and they're off, right? And I'm thinking, this was not an old show. This is not something from the 70s, right? This was something from the 21st century. I don't think it was new, but, 2000s, 2010, maybe. I'm thinking, God, how old is this car hot wiring trope? First of all, it's not something that's that simple and easy to do on those older cars. And second, aren't all the modern cars like these push-button cars? Would they still have the same wiring underneath the steering column? Because the steering column was what led to where the key went in. So what would you be pulling at? Like, how come they haven't updated this car theft trope to the guy having some sort of app on his phone that duplicates a car fob, and then he can just push the button himself? Come on, man, update your tropes.
Our top story tonight.
Our top story tonight.
Bellissimo Francisco Franco is still dead.
Is still dead.
All right, for our main story today, I just wanted to focus the entire podcast on this holiday, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. First of all, thankful that we still have the day, that it hasn't been repealed or renamed by the Tangerine Toddler. And this is the day that, Republicans come out and pretend that Dr. King was saying, don't pay attention to race. It's like Republicans, right-wingers, they know one Dr. King quote. I have a dream that my children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Which to them, they interpret that to mean we shouldn't pay attention to your skin color. We should only pay attention to how good a person you are. But that's not what was being said. That was aspirational. That was hopeful for the future, that maybe someday we would get to that point. But you can't get to that point without recognizing the color of the skin and the hundreds and hundreds of years that led up to being treated differently because of the color of the skin. To that effect, there's so many better passages from Dr. King's to read. I always recommend people take a look at the letter from the Birmingham jail, which is amazing writing, amazing prose as you read the thing. It's just, historical and I keep saying amazing. But the thing that blows my mind about it is he wrote it like on toilet paper. He wrote it on a roll because, they didn't give him, paper to be able to, like a notebook to write stuff. So just incredible. I got to stop saying amazing. Incredible that he was able to do such a thing. And the more you learn about this era in American history, the more you realize there are so many lessons there that must be learned by white people today. Because what we're seeing going on in Minneapolis with ICE, with this infestation of fascism, is that it always comes for us eventually. The old Niemöller poem, first they came for the trade unionists, etc., etc. Right now, it's first we're coming for anyone who's got brown skin or a Hispanic accent, rounding up black people as well. Remember when they did that raid in Chicago and they raided the big apartment building and separated let's put the Hispanics over there and the blacks over there. Don't think this won't also be coming for us. We've seen it in the murder of Renee Nicole Good. They will come for anyone who doesn't get in line and submit to the hierarchy, submit to the fascism. And that's going to include white people. And unfortunately, white people don't have the muscle for this. We don't have the experience, the generational legacy passed down, the faith, the brotherhood that repressed people in this country have had since its founding. And so we're going to have to turn to black leaders, to Hispanic leaders, to gay folks, and learn the lessons from them. We can't expect them to do it for us. We're going to have to. This is our fight now. This is the civil rights fight for the white people. Not in the way that Donald Trump likes to say that, the civil rights movement was very unfair to white people. No. I mean, the fight we need to get into where we recognize it's time to be one people. It's time to check our privilege. It's time to join with our black and brown and gay and Asian and Native brothers and sisters under that Pride Progress flag and recognize that we've got to stick together. We've got to hang together or we shall all surely hang separately. And we need to be on the side of Dr. King and the right side of history and bend this moral arc of the universe back toward justice. So in response to all of that, I've been thinking about how we need to learn our history better. And a lot of white folks out here, we learn about the civil rights movement and, Rosa Parks wouldn't get off the bus, and then Dr. King led a boycott, and then there was a march on Washington, and then he said, "I have a dream," and then he was shot. All right, time to move on to Vietnam, right? That's about as much history of the civil rights movement you get, at least as what I got in a predominantly white high school back in the 80s. So I've been taken to digging into history. I purchased this volume at Costco, which is a collection of the Constitution and other writings. It's got like all the founding documents going back to like the Mayflower Compact of 1620, all the way to Hillary Clinton's acceptance speech for the Democratic presidential nomination, and a whole lot of stuff in between. Been digging into history. And also, I just got in the mail from Powell's, I don't order from Amazon, the copy of Howard Zinn's book, A People's History of the United States, 1492 to present. This is the 20th anniversary edition, so it takes us up to 1999, so complete through the 20th century. And I'm telling you, this book hits it right out of the park from the very beginning page, talking about Columbus landing and meeting the Arawak people. And Columbus notes, "They willingly traded everything they owned. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." Like, the very opening paragraph is, "Hey, look at all these kind, beautiful people who are swimming up to meet us and bringing us flowers and gifts and willingly trading and sharing everything. Let's enslave them." So this book pulls no punches. And I wanted to read from this book, this Howard Zinn book, from the chapter on Or Does It Explode?, which is a chapter on the civil rights movement. And we start shortly after the arrest of Rosa Parks in 1955. So we're pulling into 1956 in Montgomery, Alabama. And this had to do with the segregation of the bus lines, why she wouldn't move to the back seat. And this is where Dr. King comes into the history timeline as reported by Howard Zinn. Also, this was inspired by my step-granddaughter, Inez, talking to her on the phone. I read some of this stuff as he said, "You should read books for a living. You've got a great voice." So here we go, Inez. Montgomery blacks called a mass meeting. Powerful force in the community was E.D. Nixon, a veteran trade unionist and experienced organizer. There was a vote to boycott all city buses. Carpools were organized to take Negroes to work. Most people walked. The city retaliated by indicting 100 leaders of the boycott and sent many to jail. White segregationists turned to violence. Bombs exploded in 4 Negro churches. A shotgun blast was fired through the front door of the home of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the 27-year-old Atlanta-born minister who was one of the leaders of the boycott. King's home was bombed. But the black people of Montgomery persisted, and in November 1956, the Supreme Court outlawed segregation on local bus lines. Montgomery was the beginning. It forecast the style and mood of the vast protest movement that would sweep the South in the next 10 years. Emotional church meetings, Christian hymns adapted to current battles, references to lost American ideals, the commitment to nonviolence, the willingness to struggle and sacrifice. A New York Times reporter described a mass meeting in Montgomery during the boycott. One after another, indicted Negro leaders took the rostrum in a crowded Baptist church tonight to urge their followers to shun the city's buses and walk with God. More than 2,000 Negroes filled the church from basement to balcony and overflowed into the street. They chanted and sang. They shouted and prayed. They collapsed in the aisles and they sweltered in an 85-degree heat. They pledged themselves again and again to passive resistance. Under this banner, they have carried on for 80 days a stubborn boycott of the city's buses. Martin Luther King at that meeting gave a preview of the oratory that would soon inspire millions of people to demand racial justice. He said the protest was not merely over buses, but over things that, quote, go deep down into the archives of history, end quote. He said, "We have known humiliation. We have known abusive language. We have been plunged into the abyss of oppression. And we decided to rise up with the weapon of protest. It is one of the greatest glories of America that we have the right of protest. If we are arrested every day, if we are exploited every day, if we are trampled over every day, don't ever let anyone pull you so low as to hate them. We must use the weapon of love. We must have compassion and understanding for those who hate us. We must realize so many people are taught to hate us that they are not totally responsible for their hate. But we stand in life at midnight. We are always on the threshold of a new dawn. King's stress on love and nonviolence was powerfully effective in building a sympathetic following throughout the nation, among whites as well as blacks. But there were blacks who thought the message naive, that while there were misguided people who might be won over by love, there were others who would have to be bitterly fought, and not always with nonviolence. 2 years after the Montgomery boycott in Monroe, North Carolina, an ex-Marine named Robert Williams, the president of the local NAACP, became known for his view that blacks should defend themselves against violence, with guns if necessary. When local Klansmen attacked the home of one of the leaders of the Monroe NAACP, Williams and other blacks, armed with rifles, fired back. The Klan left. The Klan was being challenged now with its own tactic of violence. A Klan raid on an Indian community in North Carolina was repelled by Indians firing rifles. Still, in the years that followed, Southern blacks stressed nonviolence. On February 1st, 1960, 4 freshmen at a Negro college in Greensboro, North Carolina, decided to sit down at the Woolworth's lunch counter downtown, where only whites ate. They were refused service, and when they would not leave, the lunch counter was closed for the day. The next day they returned, and then, day after day, other Negroes came to sit silently. In the next 2 weeks, sit-ins spread to 15 cities in 5 southern states. A 17-year-old sophomore at Spelman College in Atlanta, Ruby Doris Smith, heard about Greensboro. When the student committee was formed, I told my older sister to put me on the list. And when 200 students were selected for the first demonstration, I was among them. I went through the food line in the restaurant at the state capitol with 6 other students, but when we got to the cashier, she wouldn't take our money. The lieutenant governor came down and told us to leave. We didn't, and went to the county jail. In his Harlem apartment in New York, a young Negro teacher of mathematics named Bob Moses saw a photo in the newspapers of the Greensboro sit-inners. Quote, "The students in that picture had a certain look on their faces, sort of sullen, angry, determined. Before, the Negro in the South had always looked on the defensive, cringing. This time, they were taking the initiative. They were kids my own age, and I knew this had something to do with my own life." End quote. There was violence against the sit-inners, but the idea of taking the initiative against segregation took hold. In the next 12 months, more than 50,000 people, mostly black, some white, participated in demonstrations of one kind or another in 100 cities, and over 3,600 people were put in jail. But by the end of 1960, lunch counters were open to blacks in Greensboro and many other places. A year after the Greensboro incident, a northern-based group dedicated to racial equality, CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, organized freedom rides in which blacks and whites traveled together on buses going through the South to try to break the segregation pattern on interstate travel. Such segregation had long been illegal, but the federal government never enforced the law in the South. The president now was John F. Kennedy, but he too seemed cautious about the race question, concerned about the support of Southern white leaders of the Democratic Party. The 2 buses that left Washington, D.C. on May 4th, 1961, headed for New Orleans, but never got there. In South Carolina, riders were beaten. In Alabama, a bus was set afire. Freedom riders were attacked with fists and iron bars. The Southern police did not interfere with any of this violence, nor did the federal government. FBI agents watched, took notes, did nothing. At this point, veterans of the sit-ins who had recently formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, dedicated to nonviolent but militant action for equal rights, organized another freedom ride from Nashville to Birmingham. Before they started out, they called the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. to ask for protection. As Ruby Doris Smith reported, quote, "The Justice Department said no, they couldn't protect anyone, but if something happened, they would investigate. You know how they do." End quote. The racially mixed SNCC freedom riders were arrested in Birmingham, Alabama, spent the night in jail, were taken to the Tennessee border by police, made their way back to Birmingham, took a bus to Montgomery, and there were attacked by whites with fists and clubs in a bloody scene. They resumed their trip to Jackson, Mississippi. By this time, the Freedom Riders were in the news all over the world, and the government was anxious to prevent further violence. Attorney General Robert Kennedy, instead of insisting on their right to travel without being arrested, agreed to the Freedom Riders being arrested in Jackson in return for Mississippi police protection against possible mob violence. As Victor Navasky comments in Kennedy Justice about Robert Kennedy, quote, "He didn't hesitate to trade the Freedom Riders' constitutional right to interstate travel for Senator Eastland's guarantee of their right to live." End quote. The Freedom Riders did not become subdued in jail. They resisted, protested, sang, demanded their rights. Stokely Carmichael recalled later how he and his fellow inmates were singing in the Parchman jail in Mississippi, and the sheriff threatened to take away their mattresses. "I hung on to the mattress and said, 'I think we have a right to them. I think you're unjust.' And he said, 'I don't want to hear all that shit,' and started to put on the wrist breakers. I wouldn't move and started to sing, 'I'm going to tell God how you treat me.' And everybody started to sing it. And by this time, Tyson was really to pieces. He called to the trustees, 'Get them in there!' And he went out the door and slammed it and left everybody else with their mattresses." In Albany, Georgia, a small, deep South town where the atmosphere of slavery still lingered, mass demonstrations took place in the winter of 1961 and again in 1962. Of 22,000 black people in Albany, over 1,000 went to jail for marching, assembling, to protest segregation and discrimination. Here, as in all the demonstrations that would sweep over the South, little black children participated. A new generation was learning to act. The Albany police chief, after one of the mass arrests, was taking the names of the prisoners lined up before his desk. He looked up and saw a Negro boy about 9 years old. "What's your name?" The boy looked straight at him and said, "Freedom, freedom." There is no way of measuring the effect of that Southern movement on the sensibilities of a whole generation of young black people, or of tracing the process by which some of them became activists and leaders. In Lee County, Georgia, after the events of 1961 to 62, a black teenager named James Crawford joined SNCC and began taking black people to the county courthouse to vote. One day, bringing a woman there, he was approached by the deputy registrar. Another SNCC worker took notes on the conversation. The registrar said, "What do you want?" Crawford replied, "I brought this lady down to register." After giving the woman a card to fill out and sending her outside in the hall, "Why did you bring this lady down here?" "Because she wants to be a first-class citizen like y'all." "Who are you to bring people down to register?" "It's my job." "Suppose you got 2 bullets in your head right now." "I got to die anyhow." "If I don't do it, I can get somebody else to do it." "Are you scared?" "No." "Suppose somebody come in that door and shoot you in the back of the head right now. What would you do?" "I couldn't do nothing. If they shoot me in the back of the head, there are people coming from all over the world." "What people?" "People I work for." In Birmingham in 1963, thousands of blacks went into the streets facing police clubs, tear gas, dogs, high-powered water hoses. And meanwhile, all over the Deep South, the young people of SNCC, mostly black, a few white, were moving into communities in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas. Joined by local black people, they were organizing to register people to vote, to protest against racism, to build up courage against violence. The Department of Justice recorded 1,412 demonstrations in 3 months in 1963. Imprisonment became commonplace. Beatings became frequent. Many local people were afraid. Others came forward. A 19-year-old black student from Illinois named Carver Neblett, working for SNCC in Terrell County, Georgia, reported, "I talked with a blind man who's extremely interested in the civil rights movement. He's been keeping up with the movement from the beginning. Even though this man is blind, he wants to learn all the questions on the literacy test. Imagine, while many are afraid that white men will burn our houses, shoot into them, or put us off their property, a blind man, 70 years old, wants to come to our meetings." As the summer of 1964 approached, SNCC and other civil rights groups working together in Mississippi and facing increasing violence decided to call upon young people from other parts of the country for help. They hoped that would bring attention to the situation in Mississippi. Again and again in Mississippi and elsewhere, the FBI had stood by. Lawyers for the Justice Department had stood by while civil rights workers were beaten and jailed. while federal laws were violated. On the eve of the Mississippi Summer, in early June 1964, the Civil Rights Movement rented a theater near the White House, and a busload of black Mississippians traveled to Washington to testify publicly about the daily violence, the dangers facing the volunteers coming into Mississippi. Constitutional lawyers testified that the national government had the legal power to give protection against such violence. The transcript of this testimony was given to President Johnson and Attorney General Kennedy, accompanied by a request for a protective federal presence during the Mississippi summer. There was no response. 12 days after the public hearing, 3 civil rights workers, James Chaney, a young black Mississippian, and 2 white volunteers, Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, were arrested in Philadelphia, Mississippi, released from jail late at night, then seized, beaten with chains, and shot to death. Ultimately, an informer's testimony led to jail sentences for the sheriff and deputy sheriff and others. That came too late. The Mississippi murders had taken place after the repeated refusal of the national government, under Kennedy or Johnson or any other president, to defend blacks against violence. Dissatisfaction with the national government intensified. Later that summer, during the Democratic National Convention in Washington, Mississippi, blacks asked to be seated as part of the state delegation to represent the 40% of the state's population who were black. They were turned down by the liberal Democratic leadership, including vice presidential candidate Hubert Humphrey. Congress began reacting to the black revolt, the turmoil, the world publicity. Civil rights laws were passed in 1957, 1960, and 1964. They promised much on voting equality, on employment equality, but were enforced poorly or ignored. In 1965, President Johnson sponsored and Congress passed an even stronger voting rights law, this time ensuring on-the-spot federal protection of the right to register and vote. The effect on the Negro voting in the South was dramatic. In 1952, 1 million Southern blacks, 20% of those eligible, registered to vote. In 1964, the number was 2 million, 40%. By 1968, it was 3 million, 60%, the same percentage as white voters. The federal government was trying, without making fundamental changes, to control an explosive situation, to channel anger into the traditional cooling mechanism of the ballot box, the polite petition, the officially endorsed quiet gathering. When black civil rights leaders planned a huge march on Washington in the summer of 1963 to protest the failure of the nation to solve the race problem, it was quickly embraced by President Kennedy and other national leaders and turned into a friendly assemblage. Martin Luther King's speech there thrilled 200,000 black and white Americans. I have a dream. It was magnificent oratory, but without the anger that many blacks felt. When John Lewis, a young Alabama-born SNCC leader, much arrested, much beaten, tried to introduce a stronger note of outrage at the meeting, he was censored by the leaders of the march, who insisted he omit certain sentences critical of the national government and urging militant action. 18 days after the Washington gathering, almost as if in deliberate contempt for its moderation, a bomb exploded in the basement of a black church in Birmingham, and 4 girls attending Sunday school class were killed. President Kennedy had praised the, quote, deep fervor and quiet dignity, end quote, of the march, but the black militant Malcolm X was probably closer to the mood of the black community. Speaking in Detroit 2 months after the March on Washington and the Birmingham bombing, Malcolm X said in his powerful, icy clear rhythmic style, "The Negroes were out there in the streets. They were talking about how they were going to march on Washington. That they were going to march on Washington, march on the Senate, march on the White House, march on the Congress, and tie it up, bring it to a halt, not let the government proceed. They even said they were going out of the airport and lay down on the runway and not let any airplanes land. I'm telling you what they said. That was revolution. That was revolution. That was the black revolution. It was the grassroots out there in the street. It scared the white man to death, scared the white power structure in Washington, D.C. to death. I was there. When they found out that this black steamroller was coming down on the Capitol, they called in these national Negro leaders that you respect and told them, 'Call it off,' Kennedy said. 'Look, you all are letting this thing go too far.' And old Tom said, 'Boss, I can't stop it because I didn't start it.' I'm telling you what they said. They said, 'I'm not even into it, much less the head of it.' They said, 'These Negroes are doing things on their own. They're running ahead of us.' And that old shrewd fox, he said, 'If you all aren't in it, I'll put you in it. I'll put you at the head of it. I'll endorse it. I'll welcome it. I'll help it. I'll join it.' That is what they did to the March on Washington. They joined it, became part of it, took it over. And as they took it over, it lost its militancy. It ceased to be angry. It ceased to be hot. It ceased to be uncompromising. Why, it even ceased to be a march. It became a picnic, a circus, nothing but a circus with clowns and all. No, it was a sellout. It was a takeover. They controlled it so tight, they told those Negroes what time to hit town, where to stop, what signs to carry, what song to sing, what speech they could make, and what speech they couldn't make, and then told them to get out of town by sundown. The accuracy of Malcolm X's caustic description of the March on Washington is corroborated in the description from the other side, from the establishment, by White House advisor Arthur Schlesinger in his book, 1,000 Days. He tells how Kennedy met with the civil rights leaders and said the march would, quote, create an atmosphere of intimidation, end quote, just when Congress was considering civil rights bills. A. Philip Randolph replied, quote, the Negroes are already in the streets. It is very likely impossible to get them off, end quote. Schlesinger says, quote, the conference with the president did persuade the civil rights leaders that they should not lay siege to Capitol Hill, end quote. Schlesinger describes the Washington March admiringly and then concludes, quote, so in 1963, Kennedy moved to incorporate the Negro Revolution into the Democratic coalition, end quote. But it did not work. The blacks could not be easily brought into the Democratic coalition when bombs kept exploding in churches, when new civil rights laws did not change the root condition of black people. In the spring of 1963, the rate of unemployment for whites was 4.8%. For non-whites, it was 12.1%. According to the government estimates, 1/5 of the white population was below the poverty line, and 1/2 of the black population was below that line. The civil rights bills emphasized voting, but voting was not a fundamental solution to racism or poverty. In Harlem, blacks who had voted for years still lived in rat-infested slums. In precisely those years when the civil rights legislation coming out of Congress reached its peak, 1964 and 1965, there were black outbreaks in every part of the country. In Florida, set off by the killing of a Negro woman and a bomb threat against a Negro high school. In Cleveland, set off by the killing of a white minister who sat in the path of a bulldozer to protest discrimination against blacks in construction work. In New York, set off by the fatal shooting of a 15-year-old Negro boy during a fight with an off-duty policeman. There were riots also in Rochester, Jersey City, Chicago, Philadelphia. In August 1965, just as Lyndon Johnson was signing into law the Stronger Voting Rights Act, providing for federal registration of black voters to ensure their protection, the black ghetto in Watts, Los Angeles erupted in the most violent urban outbreak since World War II. It was provoked by the forcible arrest of a young Negro driver, the clubbing of a bystander by police, the seizure of a young black woman falsely accused of spitting on the police. There was rioting in the streets, looting and firebombing of stores. Police and National Guardsmen were called in. They used their guns. 34 people were killed, most of them black, hundreds injured, 4,000 arrested. Robert Conant, a West Coast journalist, wrote of the riot, in Los Angeles, the Negro was going on record that he would no longer turn the other cheek. That, frustrated and goaded, he would strike back whether the response of violence was an appropriate one or no. In the summer of 1966, there were more outbreaks with rock throwing, looting, firebombing by Chicago blacks, and wild shootings by the National Guard. 3 blacks were killed, one a 13-year-old boy, another a 14-year-old pregnant girl. In Cleveland, the National Guard was summoned to stop a commotion in the black community. 4 Negroes were shot to death, 2 by troopers, 2 by white civilians. It seemed clear by now that the nonviolence of the Southern movement, perhaps tactically necessary in the Southern atmosphere and effective because it could be used to appeal to national opinion against the segregationist South, was not enough to deal with the entrenched problems of poverty in the black ghetto. In 1910, 90% of Negroes lived in the South, but by 1965, mechanical cotton pickers harvest 81% of the Mississippi Delta cotton. Between 1940 and 1970, 4 million blacks left the country for the city. By 1965, 80% of blacks lived in cities, and 50% of black people lived in the North. There was a new mood in SNCC and among many militant blacks. Their disillusionment was expressed by a young black writer, Julius Lester. Now it is over. America's had chance after chance to show that it really meant that all men are endowed with certain unalienable rights. Now it is over. The days of singing freedom songs and the days of combating bullets and billy clubs with love. Love is fragile and gentle and seeks a like response. They used to sing, I loved everybody as they ducked bricks and bottles. Now they sing, too much love, Too much love. Nothing kills a like too much love. In 1967, in the black ghettos of the country, came the greatest urban riots of American history. According to the report of the National Advisory Committee on Urban Disorders, they, quote, involved Negroes acting against local symbols of white American society, end quote, symbols of authority and property in the black neighborhoods, rather than purely against white persons. The commission reported 8 major uprisings, 33 serious but not major outbreaks, and 123 minor disorders. 83 died of gunfire, mostly in Newark and Detroit. Quote, the overwhelming majority of persons killed or injured in all the disorders were Negro civilians, end quote. The typical rioter, according to the commission, was a young high school dropout, but nevertheless somewhat better educated than his non-rioting Negro neighbor, and usually underemployed or employed in a menial job. He was proud of his race, extremely hostile to both whites and middle-class Negroes, and although informed about politics, highly distrustful of the political system. The report blamed white racism for the disorders and identified the ingredients of explosive mixture which has been accumulating in our cities since the end of World War II. Quote, pervasive discrimination and segregation in employment, education, and housing, growing concentrations of impoverished Negroes in our major cities, creating a growing crisis of deteriorating facilities and services and unmet human needs. A new mood has sprung up among Negroes, particularly the young, in which self-esteem and enhanced racial pride are replacing apathy and submission to the system. End quote. But the commission report itself was a standard device of the system when facing rebellion. Set up an investigating committee, issue a report. The words of the report, however strong, will have a soothing effect. That didn't completely work either. Black power was the new slogan, an expression of distrust of any progress given or conceded by whites, a rejection of paternalism. Few blacks or whites knew the statement of the white writer Aldous Huxley, liberties are not given, they are taken. But the idea was there in black power. Also, a pride in race, an insistence on black independence, and often on black separation to achieve this independence. Malcolm X was the most eloquent spokesman for this. After he was assassinated, as he spoke on a public platform in February 1965, in a plan whose origins are still obscure, he became the martyr of this movement. Hundreds of thousands read his autobiography. He was more influential in death than during his lifetime. Martin Luther King, though still respected, was being replaced now by new heroes, Huey Newton of the Black Panthers, for instance. The Panthers had guns. They said blacks should defend themselves. Malcolm X in late 1964 had spoken to black students from Mississippi visiting Harlem. You'll get freedom by letting your enemy know that you'll do anything to get your freedom, then you'll get it. It's the only way you'll get it. When you get that kind of attitude, they'll label you a crazy Negro, or they'll call you a crazy they don't say Negro. Or they'll call you an extremist or a subversive or seditious or a red or a radical. But when you stay radical long enough and get enough people to be like you, you'll get your freedom. Congress responded to the riots of 1967 by passing the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Presumably, it would make stronger the laws prohibiting violence against blacks. It increased the penalties against those depriving people of their civil rights. However, it said, quote, the provisions of this section shall not apply to acts or omissions on the part of law enforcement officers, members of the National Guard, or members of the armed forces of the United States who are engaged in suppressing a riot or civil disturbance. Furthermore, it added a section, agreed to by liberal members of Congress in order to get the whole bill passed, that provided up to 5 years in prison for anyone traveling interstate or using interstate facilities, including mail or telephone, to, quote, organize, promote, encourage, participate in, or carry on a riot, end quote. It defined a riot as an action by 3 or more persons involving threats of violence. The first person prosecuted under the Civil Rights Act of 1968 was a young black leader of SNCC, H. Rap Brown, who had made a militant, angry speech in Maryland just before a racial disturbance there. Later, the act would be used against anti-war demonstrators in Chicago, the Chicago 8. Martin Luther King himself became more and more concerned about problems untouched by civil rights laws, problems coming out of poverty. In the spring of 1968, he began speaking out, against the advice of some Negro leaders who feared losing friends in Washington, against the war in Vietnam. He connected war and poverty. It's inevitable that we've got to bring out the question of the tragic mix-up in priorities. We are spending all of this money for death and destruction, and not nearly enough money for life and constructive development. When the guns of war become a national obsession, social needs inevitably suffer. King now became a chief target of the FBI, which taped his private phone conversations, sent him fake letters, threatened him, blackmailed him, and even suggested once in an anonymous letter that he commit suicide. FBI internal memos discussed finding a black leader to replace King. As a Senate report on the FBI said in 1976, the FBI tried, quote, to destroy Dr. Martin Luther King, end quote. King was turning his attention to troublesome questions. He still insisted on nonviolence. Riots were self-defeating, he thought, but they did express a deep feeling that could not be ignored. And so nonviolence, he said, quote, must be militant, massive nonviolence, end quote. He planned a poor people's encampment in Washington, this time not with the paternal approval of the president. And he went to Memphis, Tennessee to support a strike of garbage workers in that city. There, standing on a balcony outside his hotel room, he was shot to death by an unseen marksman. The poor people's encampment went on, and then it was broken up by a police action, just as the World War I Veterans Bonus Army of 1932 was dispersed. The killing of King brought new urban outbreaks all over the country, in which 39 people were killed, 35 of them black. Evidence was piling up that even with all the civil rights laws now on the books, the courts would not protect blacks against violence and injustice. In the 1967 riots in Detroit, 3 black teenagers were killed in the Algiers motel. 3 Detroit policemen and a black private guard were tried for this triple murder. The defense conceded. A UPI dispatch said that the 4 men had shot 2 of the blacks. A jury exonerated them. In Jackson, Mississippi, in the spring of 1970, on the campus of Jackson State College, a Negro college, police laid down a 28-second barrage of gunfire using shotguns, rifles, and a submachine gun. 400 bullets or pieces of buckshot struck the girls' dormitory, and 2 black students were killed. A local grand jury found the attack justified, and U.S. District Court Judge Harold Cox, a Kennedy appointee, declared that students who engage in civil disorder, quote, must expect to be injured or killed, end quote. In Boston in 1970, a policeman shot and killed an unarmed black man, a patient in a ward in the Boston City Hospital, firing 5 shots after the black man snapped a towel at him. The chief judge in the Municipal Court of Boston exonerated the policeman. In Augusta, Georgia, in May 1970, 6 Negroes were shot to death during looting and disorder in the city. The New York Times reported, a confidential police report indicates that at least 5 of the victims were killed by the police. An eyewitness to one of the deaths said he watched a Negro policeman and his white partner fire 9 shots into the back of a man suspected of looting. They did not fire warning shots or ask him to stop running, says Charles A. Reed, a 38-year-old businessman. In April 1970, a federal jury in Boston found a policeman had used excessive force against 2 black soldiers from Fort Devens, and one of them required 12 stitches in his scalp. The judge awarded the serviceman $3 in damages. These were normal cases, endlessly repeated in the history of the country, coming randomly but persistently out of a racism deep in the institutions, the mind of the country. But there was something else, a planned pattern of violence against militant black organizers carried on by the police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. On December 4th, 1969, a little before 5 in the morning, a squad of Chicago police, armed with a submachine gun and shotguns, raided an apartment where Black Panthers lived. They fired at least 82 and perhaps 200 rounds into the apartment, killing 21-year-old Black Panther leader Fred Hampton as he lay in his bed, and another Black Panther, Mike Clark. Years later, it was discovered in a court proceeding that the FBI had an informer among the Panthers and that they had given the police a floor plan of the apartment, including a sketch of where Fred Hampton slept. Was the government turning to murder and terror because the concessions, the legislation, the speeches, the intonation of the civil rights hymn "We Shall Overcome" by President Lyndon Johnson were not working? It was discovered later that the government, in all the years of the civil rights movement, while making concessions through Congress, was acting through the FBI to harass and break up black militant groups. Between 1956 and 1971, the FBI concluded a massive counterintelligence program known as COINTELPRO that took 295 actions against black groups. Black militancy seemed stubbornly resistant to destruction. A secret FBI report to President Nixon in 1970 said, quote, "A recent poll indicates that approximately 25% of the black population has a great respect for the Black Panther Party, including 43% of blacks under 21 years of age," end quote. Was there fear that blacks would turn their attention from the controllable field of voting to the more dangerous arena of wealth and poverty, of class conflict? And that's all the time we've got for today's smoke session. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day to you. And remember, folks, it might get a whole lot worse before it gets any better, but try to stand strong and remember that we are the real Americans. We are the ones who really believe in our founding documents. We really believe all men are created equal. We really believe in liberty and justice for all. We really believe in bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. We are a nation of immigrants. We love freedom. We love liberty. And we're not going to let Donald Trump and Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance and Pam Bondi and Pete Kegsbreath and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tom Homan and all the rest, Marco Rubio, of these evil, evil creatures who I will live long enough to see be tried for their crimes against this great nation. We shall overcome this. Be strong, learn from history, talk to some black people. The Radical Russ Show is produced, directed, researched, written, recited, posted, and catered by me, Radical Russ Belville, and governed by Creative Commons Share-alike licensing. News, music, video clips, and social media posts are reproduced under fair use copyright laws for commentary and analysis. My main theme is We Love the Herb by Herbal Nation, and interstitial music is by Russ Boom Boom Belville.
What's the boom boom for?
Boom, boom, boom.
Which brings us to our post-credits scene.
Oh, just one more thing, sir. I was thinking.
Yeah, I was mentioning how I got the note on my Star Spangled Chevy, and that reminds me, is there a word for the kind of words that you only see in the company of another specific word? Like spangled. Nothing is spangled other than stars. You never hear of something being stripe spangled or triangle spangled or pentagon spangled, right? It's all star spangled. Or rue the day. You shall rue the day. Right? I mean, I guess sometimes you could rue the decision, but really, people say rue the day. Or the mind boggles. It boggles the mind. Nothing else gets boggled but the mind. Is there a word for those kind of words? There's got to be a word for those kind of words. Anyway, you can contact me by email at radicalruss@gmail.com. Call my message line at 877-RUSS-420. That's 877-877-420. And reach me on social media on Blue Sky as radicalruss.com and nowhere else. You can support this podcast financially by donating to Radical Russ on Venmo, Rad Russ on Cash App, or via PayPal on my website at radicalruss.com. Get this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, my website, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take care of each other.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow